Let's talk about the first form of waste. That's going to be a defect. As I used in the last example, a part that requires holes to be drilled in it would be considered defective if those holes weren't put in the right place, or if they were the wrong size, or there was the wrong number of them. Okay, that defect results in the part either having to be thought through how you could what's called rework it, which takes up more time and resources to get fixed, or that part has to be scrapped, thrown away. Ideally, hopefully you could recycle that part for its value, but in the end, that defect you could define as waste. School environment, it breaks down a little bit. I'm still expecting you all to make mistakes here and there. That's part of trying and doing. But I would say if you want to have a parallel example in your school life, the closest thing I could think of would be just completely doing the wrong assignment when it was asked for. That would be a clear form of waste in the educational environment. The second form of waste, we're going to say, is waiting. You guys could probably intuitively understand this. Say you wanted to have something done, like in our cell phone example here, to a certain degree. You need to go into the store to get something done. Having to wait in a queue of people 5 in front of you is not a good use of time. It is wasted time, unless you can really multitask. In a manufacturing environment, waiting would be considered if you're moving material from one machine to another for processing. If the work in process, or WIP as it's called, has to wait to get onto a machine, that's considered wasted time, and that's wasted time and is a form of waste. So waiting is a form of waste. Third form of waste, extra processing. Now, we'll start with the manufacturing example here. If you ever hear me say don't gold plate the toilet, depending on who you are and what your budget is, I guess maybe you would want that. But typically you could understand if you're manufacturing toilets, they really just need to have a porcelain finish to them. That's what they're doing. If you needed to be gold plated, you could imagine the extra amounts of steps and cost that would be involved in materials and the processing required to do that, which may not really add that much value to the normal customer. Okay, in a school environment, this one's a little bit challenging to bring up, or in your daily life. You could imagine that, again, to the homework assignment, though granted it's sometimes good to do a little bit of extra work, but if we just asked for a quick rough draft and you came up with the finished product to start and spent 5 hours on an assignment that your teacher was only expecting you to, say, spend 45 minutes on, that would be considered over-processing, like in an educational environment. So there's many, many more examples of this in a manufacturing and industrial environment, but if you ever hear me say don't go plate the toilet in class or something like that, that means you're over-processing what you're doing. Okay, I think we're up to number 4 now. This one seems like it's like the last one, extra processing, but this one's considered motion during the process itself. So actually this one, maybe the best way to convey this would be actually an educational thing. Imagine a pencil. I'm writing something down. Imagine that after every letter I wrote on this post-it note, so the letter A, I had to then set down my pencil and set down my post-it note, and then I picked it back up and wrote the next letter, B. Can you see how much extra motion is in there? Okay. In a manufacturing environment, this definitely becomes clear if you imagine the assembly of a car, or if you have to make 1 million iPhones quickly. Every single little motion that it takes to put components together, you want to have as few motions as possible to make things as quickly as possible. Not to mention the fact that it takes up extra energy and could potentially fatigue workers if you have to have them doing unnecessary motions during the process. That makes sense? So that is waste number 4. Let's talk about waste number 5. This is called overproduction. The example I'll use here is, imagine you're making cookies. Now, yes, it's hard to imagine that you could overproduce cookies, but there is a point at which if you really only needed to produce cookies for your immediate family, and you say produced 4 dozen cookies because you got really excited about it, that's a lot of extra flour, eggs, chocolate chips, and everything else that could have been put to other uses, but yet now are tied up in 4 dozen cookies that could also add some excessive calories to what you really needed to have on hand. Okay, it's very easy to draw the parallel to a large-scale manufacturing environment. That, hey, say if you're making any particular product and you make 10 times the amount that you really needed to make, being anything, you're going to pour a lot of time, money, and resources into making something that you're not going to be able to sell immediately. That's definitely a form of waste. Okay, so I'm going to talk now number 6. It's closely related to overproduction, but inventory. Having excess inventory is also considered a form of waste. Getting back to our cookie example there, if you overproduce the amount of cookies that can easily be eaten, and then you have to store those on a shelf somewhere, right? It is very easy if you have excess inventory. Could you imagine all the things? One, it takes up space in your cupboard that you may need to utilize for something else. Two, you could end up having things eating the inventory that you don't want, say little mammalian creatures like rats and stuff. And the other fact that those cookies have a shelf life. You would have put all that effort into making them and they could get stale. So, I mean, there's only so much finite space in a cookie jar and they're only going to last so long. So having that inventory costs you money to store it, keep it safe, and not have it perish. Okay, so having more inventory than you need, very closely related to overproduction, is another form of waste. Number 7 form of waste. It's going to be transportation to the customers. So we talked motion within the manufacturing, like actual processing, but actually having to move what it is you're making to get to a customer is considered a form of waste if it's excessive. So imagine that, well, and even within a warehouse itself, motion or storing things on one side of a building and then having to transport it all the way back across the building to get to another workstation and then back again to go to inventory. That's all wasted motion. You can consider too, if you were actually shipping to your customer and you shipped it to a warehouse across the country on the East Coast, and then your customer was back on the West Coast close by where the manufacturing facility was, that you're excessively transporting your product back and forth. You want to eliminate that transportation requirement as much as you can. The customer ultimately doesn't really want to have to pay for that so much. So, you could consider transporting yourself to and from school every day. You want to take the most direct line as possible. Now, maybe you want to go say hi to a friend or two there, but usually it's the friends that are on the way to school, if that's how it works. Anyway, so excess transportation, very wasteful. Wait a minute. What happened to my shirt? Everything's going plaid. Anyway, number 8, waste. That's the waste of human talent that we're going to see now. You got to bear with me on this. It's a little tough to see it in the educational environment, but you're all very talented, and you'll see that hopefully I try and conduct my classes where I'm trying to take as much input as I can from all of you within the bounds of what we're trying to learn, or in terms of projects that we're working on. I hope I can try and get a lot of feedback from you all as to what's working or how you think you should go about it. When you get out into your working world as adults, or if you happen to hold the job right now in high school, I'm curious if you've seen companies that then have, say, a suggestions box that's kicking around of how are we doing and what should we do to improve. So companies that are able to put advice and suggestions to work from the very bottom level as opposed to being driven from the top are really successful in taking advantage of all of their human talent. So assembly line workers, how well they are empowered to actually make suggestions to change things that they see going wrong in terms of defects on the production line floor. That's utilizing human skill, knowledge, and talent. There's a tendency nowadays to want to automate everything. You can go Google Elon Musk's take on humans being underrated when it came to the launch of the Model 3 Tesla. They tried to automate way too much and didn't take advantage of the innate talents for humans to be adaptable, identify problems, and figure things out on the fly. That's what makes humans really, truly valuable, us free-thinking people. Okay? So it is a good thing to always strive for companies to take advantage of their human employee talent. Okay? So that's going to conclude right now the talk about the different forms of waste. But what we're going to focus on in our class is probably going to be at least 3 out of the 8. Okay? We're going to be focusing our attention on defects, because we're going to be making things and we want to make things correctly. And those things that we make could have defects if we're not watching out and being mindful of that. Wasted time, because we have a limited amount of time in our classes and we want to take full advantage of all the time that we have. Okay. And number three, I guess, as I thought about it, is going to be to a certain degree the inventory. We're going to have to be dealing with lots and lots of things inside of the shop, and I don't want to have to overwhelm. There's very limited resources of money to run our school classes, and I don't want to be needlessly wasting inventory that we have or purchasing the wrong things. So imagine I were to buy, I don't know, 1,000 feet of a particular type of steel, but already we had a bunch of that. There's not a good place to store it, and guess what? We actually needed end mills, drills, these other things. Managing our inventory and knowing what we at Oak Ridge need to be purchasing on time, storing, and keeping organized is something that we're really going to be focusing on in our classes. But I wanted to make you aware of all 8 forms of waste.
And now for something completely different.
I got my baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back. I got my baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby. I got my baby back ribs. Ah, baby ribs.